All right, looks like we have a pretty good crowd tonight. We got some new faces. We got some staff here. So we're looking pretty good. And tonight, let's see. I wanted to give credit to the people that suggested the opening. So for Mike R., JB, and Jonathan Morales, who wanted to see the Scandinavian defense, this episode is for you. And there were many others, so when I see the same openings over and over, I can't help but pick it for my lecture. Okay, this is Chess Openings Explained. I'm Jonathan Schrantz, and today we're going to look at a very controversial opening. Now, last week, you'll remember, I was kind of joking about it. I had my box. I was placing things into different categories. Certain openings were solid, certain openings were sharp, certain openings were suspicious. And it was hard. Where do you categorize this opening here? We see a very violent and aggressive move already on move 1 from black. He immediately contests the e4 pawn with the move to d5. So what is this? Is it suspicious? That's what the general consensus was, but there's a lot of people that think of it as a solid opening. Some people think of it as a sharp opening. And really, it's a little bit of both. So obviously, why would somebody even consider doing this, knowing that after the pawn takes, which is the overwhelmingly popular move here, and after, okay, you can play knight f6, but today we're going to look at the main line with queen takes. And so why would somebody do this if you're, a beginner? This is in this break, one of the very first beginner rules that you know, don't bring your queen out too early, don't move your pieces twice in the opening. And yet here, black is tempting white to play the move knight to c3 and kick the queen away. So why would somebody ever want to play this? Well, for black, he's thinking in a lot of cases he can get an improved Caro-Kann, and we'll look at that when we get to the main line. Okay, he's thinking, all right, well, this bishop gets to get out for free. I'm going to set up my pawns in a nice solid fashion, and I'm going to hope for a solid position. And if white doesn't play very accurately, doesn't play actively enough, I'm going to get a very nice solid position. And so that's the one argument you might have for why this is a solid opening. Also, it's obviously, there is some suspicion you're moving your queen around a lot. And so white is going to try to take advantage of this in this opening. He's going to try to get all of his pieces out as quickly as possible and exploit the fact that the queen has made a couple moves in the opening and black is behind in development. And okay, we'll see the strategies as we go along here. So black has to move his queen. And there's two main moves here. The first one, which is still arguably the main line, although also popular still, is a queen to d6. This is quickly becoming one of the most popular variations. And there are some others that we'll explore, but knowing Ben Simon, he'll cut all that out. So you got to be here live to see those, because he's like, it's too long. This is going to be a 3-hour lecture, so brace yourselves. It won't be that long, but all right. So we're going to look at queen to a5 first, which for the longest time was the main line. And it's still very popular today. And so, okay, how should white proceed? There's a lot of different ways. The most common here is just to play d4. And so kind of the point of what black has done so far is he's prevented white from getting the pawn duo with his pawns on c4 and d4. And as we'll see, if black has his pawn set up here, white is going to be trying to play the pawn break d5, breaking open the position. And if you had a pawn on c4, that would be much easier. But since you put a knight on c3, you gain some time. But all right, also you put a knight in front of your pawn that they might want to move. All right, so black makes a normal developing move. And then white, also the main line is just to move his knight out, which of course looks like a logical move. But it's not the only move here. You can consider bishop to c4. You can consider bishop to d2. And those have their purposes as well. You're just trying to get the move d5 in as quickly as possible. But knight f3 also has its appeal. In a lot of lines, you're going to go to e5 and play a quick g4, g5. And we'll understand why in a little bit here. Okay, now black has to be careful of his queen. He needs to make sure he always has a retreat square. At some point, there's going to be a bishop going to d2, and the knight will be threatening discoveries. So c6 is sort of essential to black's plan. He knows that's how he's going to set up his pawns anyway. And now his queen can retreat, usually to c7. So he's got some access to retreat if he ever needs to. Now, white will get his bishop out. Again, another move that's fighting for the d5 square. And it's time for black to get his bishop out. Normally in the Scandinavian, just as a general guideline, you're going to get your light squared bishop out first and your dark squared bishop out second. And the reason is you're going to put a pawn on e6, and you don't want your bishop trapped behind your wall of pawns. So there's two logical options. Bishop to f5 is the most common, so that's what we'll be looking at. There is something to be said about bishop to g4, although these lines are very, very sharp. So white has no problem here playing h3, trying to win the bishop pair, but most people will retreat to h5, not wanting to give up control of the light squares. Although if you were watching, there was a blitz game between Caruana and Carlsen from last year, 2015, and Carlsen took here, which seems to be his preferred way to play these situations. And white followed up by taking with the queen. And now white has the two bishops, and he does get a very pleasant position. And we'll see in another game. Okay, so normally they retreat, and these are actually very, very sharp lines. Now we've had Grandmaster Ian Rogers here doing lots of commentary for us, and he's by far played this the most in the database that I have. You see his name at the top for all of the games in this variation. And black has to be really careful, so if you do want to play this, you should know what you're doing. White's next few moves are going to be g4, knight to e5. He's going to end up putting his bishop here, and his queen is going to protect the e4 square so that he can, if the bishop is here, he can, he's going to play h4, h5. He's going to try to trap that bishop, and since we haven't castled over there yet, a move like g4 is totally not out of the question, followed by a quick knight to e5. And that's also a very common theme in this opening, the theme of the bishop hunt. White is often going after this light squared bishop, so we're going to see a lot of that today. Okay, so more popular is bishop to f5. And if you play the Scandinavian regularly, that's almost always where you put your bishop. And your follow-up is going to be the move e6. All right, so white is still thinking about how he can make the d5 break work. So he plays bishop to d2, which is usually a prerequisite to playing d5. For this recipe to work, there's generally three key ingredients that you need to play a successful d5 pawn break. One of those is you need to have a bishop on d2 so that you can do discoveries on the queen and gain a free move with your knight. Another thing that's really important is that the black king is still in the center. It'll be a lot more effective if you're opening the center and exploiting the fact that black hasn't developed all of his pieces yet, if the king is there. And importantly, your other light square bishop, he needs to be protected as well, usually by the move queen to e2, which not only protects the bishop, it also puts a lot of pressure on the e-file. So these three key ingredients are what we need. And so the move bishop to d2, that gets one of them. The king's already here. So next we're going to try to protect our bishop with queen e2. So it's kind of mandatory for black to play e6 here. And it's important to kind of show why. If you play a little bit carelessly, a seemingly normal development move, you actually can be in a lot of trouble already. And in this position, black is already flirting with having a lost position. So after queen e2, now we have everything that we need for the d5 break to work. We can see in this position, d5 is actually really crushing. And we'll look at why. If black takes, and he probably should, knight takes d5. This was the point, so we got an attack on the queen. So she's going to have to move back. And one of the biggest problems for black is the open d-file, which can really be a headache. And we'll see. So the queen has to retreat. And now the move that white plays is he takes the knight. And there's not a comfortable way for black to take back. If he takes back with the knight, this is the easiest move to refute. You have the move bishop to b5. And if you block, then you're just blundering this piece. So that move is definitely out. So yeah, the most common is taking with the pawn. We'll look briefly at taking with the queen. But this might be a little bit too many queen moves. You can't just move your queen around the whole time. You might be thinking about taking on b2. But here, after the move castling queenside, white already has a really big threat. And the threat is bishop to g5, following by the sacrifice on d7. To illustrate this point, we'll go a couple moves further. Now black has a really cute move here. I don't say it's the best, but it's kind of funny. He can play bishop to a3. And the point is, if we take this bishop, what's black's next move? It seems like the audience tonight can probably figure this one out. Queen A1, and that's, yeah, a funny checkmate. This would have been in my commerce lecture about funny checkmates. So, all right, that's not what happened. And this is a game this has actually been played about 4 times. So people do get into trouble here. So after c3, now you might be threatening to take the bishop. And if you play a careless move, you should probably retreat the queen with the same idea that if you take, there's also a checkmate. Don't forget about the bishop. But a careless move, and the game would already be over. Now you can play bishop to g5, winning a tempo on the queen. She only has 1 square she can go to where she's safe. And now you can take this knight. And black should either castle here or resign. Because if you take the rook, there's this really nasty fork. So yeah, not the best. So you can see that does get you into a lot of trouble if you take with the queen. It's also, there are some issues if you take with the pawn. White will play the same at the beginning. He's going to castle queenside, and he's going to make some pretty serious threats. So let's see. There was a game, and this is the game Petrusian Winter, which was the highest rated game I could find from this position. And a6 was played. It's not a whole lot different if you develop your queen, but that also was a possible continuation. But after a6, white got a crushing position after the move knight to d4, threatening to take the bishop, which would just win a piece because there is a pin here. So white is just going to try to take the bishop. If you drop back, we're thinking about some sacrifices here. These sacrifices don't quite work immediately, but in this game, after white plays the move f4, now he's getting really serious. He's playing f5 next, which will crush black. And after the move bishop to c5, in the game white played bishop to c3, but now the sacrifice does work. You can take here, and this would just crush black. So you did give up a piece, but you have a lot of nasty discoveries. This queen is looking really good. Your rook is really good. It's easy to find a good square for this piece. So if black blocks, for example, white can win a piece back with taking, and after this move, you lose a piece. It is a discovered check, and whatever happens, you win a piece here. So this would be a fantastic win for white. So you can really see the dangers of the d5 break. That's something black has to really be on alert for, because that can end your game immediately. So it is a rather sharp opening sometimes, and black does have to be extra careful. That's why e6 is necessary here. And now we reach sort of a branch in the tree. There's 2 main moves here for white. The most common is, at least now in modern opening theory here, knight to d5, which has overtaken the previous queen to e2. Now, before I did this lecture, I was only familiar with some of this theory, but then you look in the database and you look at this position. I did the top 14 games by rating of the white player, and they all played knight to d5, which is something really strange. Normally, a lot of people will be playing it, but not everybody. But it seems like everybody at the top these days is playing knight to d5, so that's going to be our main line for tonight, and it is probably the most critical attempt for an advantage as white. To give you a sense of what's going on here, so you're trying to make this work. You protected it. We got our key ingredients. We're ready to play d5. So if black is a little bit too greedy, he actually can get into a lot of trouble immediately, because now the move d5 comes. And if you take, before we take back on d5, we can toss in this check. And now black is in a lot of trouble. So even if he retreats, because we were attacking the queen with our bishop, there's no real good defense here after the move bishop to c3. The problem is we're attacking your bishop, and if it retreats, we're ready to bring a rook into d1. Now, black can hope that he can play the move e5 and protect his knight. That's his only hope, even though e5 is not the move you want to play, but you got to try to save your bishop. But white can stop him, just knight h4, and if your bishop retreats, we pin the knight and we're going to pick up a piece here, and the king is in a lot of danger. So again, yeah, d5 is the key tactical point in all of these variations. So instead, the move black should play here is bishop to b4, and so this is the old line. Now, in just a minute, we're going to get to play a3, win the bishop pair, and force the queen to retreat. So why would black really want to play this way? Because it looks like, all right, white's got the two bishops, which is really nice. And what does black have? Well, in almost all positions in the Scandinavian, black is playing for dynamic and active piece play. So he's hoping at some point to maneuver one of his knights to the d5 square. He would love to trade these guys off so that d5 could be his square, a nice home for one of his knights. And he would really like to play against a dark squared bishop. And we'll see, even in the main line, he does get a lot of activity. So after a move like knight to e5, which is typically where the knight's going to go in these variations, and occasionally white is thinking about attacking and getting a pawn storm on the king side, black has to decide, should I take on e5 or not? And more often than not in this opening, they do end up taking. But you do need to be kind of careful, because this pawn, at least in the middle game, should be a pretty strong asset for white. But the point here of his play was he has time. White doesn't ever get access into d6, because he's going to plug a knight into d5 and threaten to take away white's big advantage, which is the bishop pair, which is why most people will retreat the bishop to d2. And even though d2 isn't the optimal square for a bishop, we saw this, so fans of our YouTube channel might know, if you saw Eric Hansen's lessons on how to use the two bishops, sometimes you save your bishop, you go to d2, and later it'll reemerge as a stronger piece. So now black has time to castle. And just to go a little bit farther so you can see why people may have stopped playing this line, the main continuation is g4 and f4, with the plan of trying to trap this bishop, which is a huge theme in these openings. We're on a bishop hunt here. So what should black do? Well, when you play g4, usually he should play the move h5, and we'll see why that's important for him in just a second. Because after the queen starts to get active, another common maneuver is getting the queen to c5, or and sometimes opening up the c file if you could get rid of your c pawn. The queen is usually pretty nice here on the c file, and black will get a lot of pressure on the pawn. After rook to f1, we can see why the move h5 was played. Now the rook gets access along the h file. So after we play here, the rook can come down to h3, threatening to win this bishop due to the pin. Now, it's a funny mistake would be king to b1, forgetting about the other bishop, which would be a big mistake. So you have to do something about it. The rook on h3 is just so active. You got to try to trade it off. And to take the main line to its conclusion here, you get such a position where, yes, white has two bishops, but the active play of black here really can't be denied. So I assume if you pulled a lot of strong players, there'd be mixed feelings over who would want to be better here. White, if he does have an advantage, it's only really small. And the active pieces that black has is exactly what you're trying to get when you play the Scandinavian. So I think both sides would be happy here. But this isn't the most critical continuation. So we'll go back for just a second. Okay, so we'll look not at queen to e2. We'll look briefly now at the main line, knight to d5. So again, we have our discovered attack. It's a simpler move. We're not going for an immediate d5 necessarily, though it might come in some certain variations. But after this move, again, we take the knight. And the main line is to take back with a pawn. So our first game that we look at today, that's what we're going to look at. Again, you can get into a little bit of trouble if you take with the queen, though this is a normal enough variation. And white is again going to think about how to play the move d5. You do sometimes have to worry about this pawn, but not immediately, because if you do take, again, you're going to play the move d5. And all right, after we get these lines in, this was black's key maneuver, bringing a knight over to d5. But all right, so if white does get d5 in, he's usually doing pretty good, and there's more than one move here you can take. Black should also consider the line with bishop takes c2. This is just to give you an example, because this isn't our focus of the lecture. Rook takes d5 is one of the key points. So what if we take this rook? What is white playing here? We'll notice the strength of this bishop restricting a lot of squares that the king can go to. The only squares we're not attacking are some of these light squares.
Queen a4.
Queen a4, a slight inaccuracy, because I have a legal move I can block. Yeah, it's actually mate in 1 if you go to b5. But yeah, but if you want to torture your opponent just a little bit, you want to play, I'll let you live one more move and then I'll checkmate you. So that'd be funny. But black has a clever way out of this, though it's not the greatest. And if you take the bishop, now we can take your rook, because if you check us, we're going to just grab the bishop here. So you should move the queen and protect your bishop. And this is very, very pleasant for white. Black can threaten checkmate, but white has a very nice way to defend against this. Knight to d4, an excellent square for the knight. And okay, this is sort of the best possible variation for black. And after f4, though, white is just crushing black here. The move f5 is coming. You can't castle, so it's hard to use your rook over here if you can't castle. And white just has tremendous pressure. So this would be an example of how not to play as black. Okay, so we're going to go back, and before we look at our first game, I want to briefly go over a common opening that gets the same pawn structure as we'll see in our main line. When you play the Carl Khan, occasionally you get this variation. So this is all common, and we did a lecture before on bishop to c5, the classical line. But after the move knight to f6, which is a really dynamic and fighting way to play as black, black can take here, and now we have the Bronstein-Larsen variation. And here black is trying to play for really active and dynamic play. He's hoping to make use of the G file. And okay, here none of the pieces have been developed, but if you reach this position from a Scandinavian move order, the pieces, you've already got your bishop out here, and the pawn will be here. We can imagine white's already got his pieces out. The bishop's on d2, which is obviously not a move you would consider in this position, so white will have to spend a move to correct that. And this is the big argument when you're playing the Scandinavian. Is this variation that we're going to reach, and we can jump back to it, we'll see it in a second with all the pieces where they are. Is it better for black or is it better for white than this position here? So, okay, and it's a really good debate. One thing is, in this position, the main move is c3. So white can say, well, you don't get this variation. I already got my knight on f3, and you've already spent a move playing bishop to f5. And black can say, okay, but you put your bishop on d2, which would be silly to do in this position. So let's jump right into our first game here. All right, this is the game between Ruslan Ponomariov and a guy whose name I'm going to try to pronounce, but I really have no chance. These Greek players are pretty tough for me. Ioannis Papaioannou. I'm sure I got that completely wrong, so if you're a Greek, feel free to make fun of me in the comments. And we're going to look at this. The main line was played here. All right, and we got the queen to a5 variation, and play continues as normal. And we get the knight to d5 variation. So after the retreat, not taking with the queen, we take with the pawns, And again, we get the same pawn structure as we saw when we looked at the Caro-Kann line. And so that's the big question. Who does that help more? Is it black or white? And that's what the rest of the game will determine. Now, white, at least to get a little bit more out of the opening, he's trying to, again, put his queen on e2, thinking about playing the d5 break. Also, potentially, occasionally, he has this break, but probably not in this game. If you play queen to e2, the c-pawn might be hanging here, so it's probably best to protect it. Sometimes they play the move c3, which does give away the d3 square occasionally if this knight moves away. So the most solid way for white to play is bishop to b3, just getting ready to play queen to e2. And we'll make a few more normal moves, and now we'll try to understand what are the themes, what are both sides trying to accomplish here? What is the plan for black? What's the plan for white? Black is hoping for some really dynamic play. He's begging white to castle kingside. Then, okay, this plan would be really obvious. He'd get a lot of pressure along the g file. So probably white's going to castle on the queen side. Black is not going to castle on the king side because of his pawn structure over here. So both of the kings are going to end up over on the queen side. And then the biggest plan for white is he's going to try to go on a bishop hunt. So we're going to look at that. And black will get active play if he ever can play the break c5 and get some pressure along the c file. After the king is castled, he's going to be on c1. So black's going to play c5, open up the game, and try to get really active pieces. So the way to go after the bishop is to attack it. Now you're threatening to win the bishop. So the bishop would have to retreat. And white here can make an interesting decision. Probably it's not the best to take the bishop here, though that is one idea. And even though black ends up with what I like to call the Tetris pawn formation, because it looks a lot more like a Tetris piece than it does a pawn structure that you see in the books, it does actually give black a lot of control, especially of the fifth rank here. The pawns are just really dominant, not giving white any entrance. And the fact that this bishop is looking into a wall is a pretty good feature for black. And in the future, black will think about trading off the dark squared bishops, which will be in his best interest. And he's going to try to have a knight against a bishop and try to prove that since your bishop is stuck against a wall, I can find a better square for my knight than you can find for your bishop. So, all right, so in that game, it wasn't chosen. White has another plan for trying to hunt down that bishop. He needs to get his knight out of the way so he can play h4, h5. And the way that he does this, after both sides castle, is g3. The plan is to remaneuver the knight to f4 and play h4, h5 and try to trap the bishop. Here, black just waited. He made a nice waiting move so that now when he plays c5, his king is a little bit more tucked in. And even the rook will sometimes be able to come over to the c file if he gets a nice c file attack. So just a normal move. And we see the knight maneuver. Okay, so what is black going to do? He probably can start thinking about playing c5 here. In this game, bishop to d6 was played, which is okay, but it's, you could probably spend the tempo a little bit better and just get on with your pressure here. And white plays h4, threatening to trap the bishop. So if I blunder with black and I just wait just to show, we're trapping this bishop. He only has one safe square, and now he has 0 safe squares. So this is our focus. So we're forcing black here to play the move h5, and now we're going after the bishop. We're threatening to take the bishop, and if you take back, your e-pawn is falling. I got 2 pieces that can take your e-pawn. So what happened in this game is black decided to sacrifice a pawn, which is very typical in this line. And after white takes, black is saying, my attack, after I'm getting c5 in, is going to be quite strong. I'm going to get a lot of pressure. That's why I sacrificed a pawn. And okay, you've spent some time maneuvering your knight around just to win a pawn. So after c5, white here played a nice attacking move. All right, g4. And now black played a move that will shock the audience. Rook takes knight. Okay, so it is an exchange sacrifice. He's using the one piece that really isn't involved in the attack on the king. And okay, he gave it up for the knight, hoping for some active play if you take the rook. And this position's been played about 8 times, and everybody has taken the bishop. So it is interesting to ask, what happens if we take the rook? Well, now black will get a lot of activity after he takes on d4, and his compensation really is in the form of the attack on the c-pawn and the fact that these pawns are a little bit weaker than they are in the game that we'll see, because okay, there's a pawn in front of the other pawn, which makes it harder for you to promote in the future because you don't have a rook to support your advances. And play might continue since this has never been played. The computer would like you to play king to b1, and black gets lots of compensation after threatening to skewer the queen and rook. So you play a defensive move. Black can gang up on the c2 pawn. White can defend, but here black obviously has a lot of activity for the exchange. In the future, he can solidify his pawns in the center. He can take the bishop whenever he feels like it. And just the constant pressure here on c2 makes life for white really difficult. So, all right, so that's why in the game, Ponomariov decided to take the bishop and not allow him to have all that active play. So here material is equal, but white is content with his passed h-pawn, and so in the future he'll start pushing that guy down the board. All right. Now, right, so yeah, black was about to take on d4. So now if you take on d4, I can take back with a bishop. And here black makes sort of the big mistake that hurt him in the long run. He tried to exchange the bishops, which is a mistake because if you exchange all of the pieces, the endgame is going to be winning for white. This pawn is very strong. So the more pieces that are exchanged, the better this is going to be for white. So what we saw was a liquidation of lots and lots of pieces, and then an h-pawn that starts to go up the board. And after we get the queens off, white now has a completely winning endgame. So black really misplayed that middle game. He needed to keep all of the pieces on the board because that was his big trump, was his active pieces and his dynamic play. And this often happens when you have a dynamic position and then everything gets liquidated. Suddenly you realize you're lost. Black has to get back to stop the pawn. And white advances his king to the center. This is an opening class, so we're not going to focus on the technique here, but okay, white, if he can get his king over to h5, he'd be looking pretty good because then he gets his rook over here. And yeah, so this is not the best rook here. The activity of the rook and the king are much better than black's. So black really has no chance here. Okay. And it was pretty nice technique. And now I quite like the last move too. It's just a simple move, b5, and black resigned. The point is if you take, I can check, I can bring my rook back here, and then I have 2 passed pawns, which is too many for black to deal with. So a really nice game played by white. He went on the bishop hunt, and his opponent liquidated all the pieces, so he ended up in a winning endgame. All right, we're going to look at one more game today. And this time, we'll even let black be the hero. And we'll look at a slightly different variation. So we kind of looked at queen to a5. Now we're going to look at queen to d6, which is also, potentially some people might consider this the new main line, but queen to a5 still very popular. It should be mentioned that there's 2 other queen moves. One of those is queen to d8, which I like only because it follows my rule, always play queen to d8. This position, though, it never really has had a good reputation, well, because you've wasted a lot of time. White now just gets to make a developing move and get on with things, and you got a lot of work to do to get your pieces out to active squares. But now there's not going to be any discoveries on your queen. She's safe. She's back at home. And this was even played last year between Carlsen and Caruana in a rapid game. And okay, in this game, Carlsen with the black pieces. He seems to like to put his bishop on g4 and take the knight on f3. So most, grandmasters frown on this, but he's the world champion, and that seems to be his plan every game. So protecting the b pawn, and knight to e2 is played in this game, which we'll go over briefly. It's interesting. He's going to put his bishop on g2, so the knight's not really boxing in the bishop. So that's an interesting way of protecting the d pawn. Black tries to trade queens. White decides to keep the queens on the board, which is a good decision. But now a pesky little move, attacking the c pawn, trying to provoke some weaknesses. And here, white actually has a very pleasant position. The opening of the a file is quite nice for him. He got to take back towards the center. He's got two bishops, and well, it is kind of a suspicious variation. So white ended up with a good position. But Carlsen's technique here was just simply better than his opponent's. He got ready to castle queenside. And now, he's maneuvering his knight. And this is a really nice move. He's planning on trading the dark squared bishops here, and we'll see what he does with the dark squares. So we can see in this variation, he's provoked some weaknesses here. He's going to jump a knight in. And yeah, we're not really covering this line in detail today, but just to give you an idea of this game, it was really nice. I remember watching it. It was a good one. And here he got a weakness that he's going to go take advantage of later. And it's just nice technique. Here he provoked c5, and then he just put his knight back in the hole. So after white took, now black has a passed pawn. White has some weaknesses, and he was able to exploit them. Now he's winning a pawn. Soon he's going to win more. And okay, so black is now just winning. And okay, so we saw after this trade a technically winning endgame. And so Caruana resigned here. All right, so that's that variation. There is one more move that's even more suspicious. Queen d8 is, kind of playable. But there is also the Patzer variation. Based on the joke, Patzer sees a check, Patzer plays a check. This probably is not the best queen move, although it is very hard to refute. I like to think of this opening as the John Boyer opening, because he plays it sometimes, and it is kind of funny. You play c6, this is the point you get to retreat, and white gets a lot of pieces out really quickly, and gets a very pleasant position, but it is very difficult to prove that you've refuted this based on the fact that black will try to play as solidly as possible. And just to take the line a little farther to see how white might get a good attack, this is actually the game now where Caruana is white again, so he seems to get this a lot. And let's see, where is it? Who is he playing? He's playing Cor Holes, another name I'm probably mispronouncing, who was 2266 at the time of this game, so he's playing with the black pieces. And Caruana is going to win with the white pieces here. Just to give you a little idea, a little introduction to this. And because this is extra long, Ben Simon's cutting all of this out. That's now you know. No? All right, good. The people need to see it. So this was probably the first inaccuracy from white. The computers wanted you to keep your bishop on e2 so you could quickly, advance your f-pawn. But still very pleasant for the white player. The knight's going to jump in to c5, and now there's just some big problems here, and black blundered in this position. One of the big problems is this knight is the only defender that's preventing you from forking the rook and the queen. And you can actually attack it with tempo because you attack the bishop first, and then you attack the knight. And now black is in trouble. So here you could go in for the fork, but he plays an even stronger move, c4. And now the knight goes on a little journey into white's camp, and it's very unusual to see a knight on b1. And here white is winning material. So the game ended quickly after this move. the threat of knight to e5 with more pressure on the pin piece, and the fact that you're already down material and you're losing more, made black give it up here. So now, on to our next featured game. Okay, so on to queen d6, which is becoming a very popular move. We'll see white do sort of the same thing, and we'll see black go for a slightly different plan in this position, a6. Now in this variation, what typically happens is he's trying to play the move b5 and bishop to b7, which we didn't see in the other lines. So a6 is useful not just because it controls b5, and so white's not going to put a piece there, but the move b5 is sort of a good variation for black. So white, to refute this, plays g3 and gets his bishop on the long diagonal, and now black is best advised to find a different approach. If you play b5 here, for example, white tends to get a very good position after some normal moves, and now knight to e5, trading the light squared bishops, which actually helps white in this position because he is ahead in development and he gets to make some pretty serious threats faster than black can counter them. The first move is queen to f3, attacking the rook in the corner, and gaining more time. You can gain time on the queen by putting your bishop on f4, and this is why this variation is just so nice for white. Now after the simple exchange, you can play d5, and again we see the d5 break just crush black here. This is a very, very bad position for black. So this line is almost unplayable. People will find different ways to play it, so it's not there are some ways you can try to play with the move b5, but that was not one of them. All right, so instead, bishop to g4 is the main move here. Black is playing against the d4 pawn, so this bishop now is attacking one of the defenders of d4, and we'll even see him put a knight on c6 and castle to bring a rook to the d file, and so his opening plan is to put a lot of pressure on the center immediately. So as indicated, and after some normal moves, white has to make a decision here, and he can think about h3, he can think about d5. The most common is d5, and again there are two moves here, and one is safer than the other. The most common is knight to e5, but it should also be mentioned that knight to b4 is a really sharp variation that both players should know if they're going to play this. White can do something kind of funny here, though, after you kick the bishop back. And it is best not to give away the bishop for the knight and give away the light squares, because this will be a really sharp variation. And White's funny little trick is he attacks the queen, and then he attacks her again. So he got to e3 with tempo. And all right, so some reasons that people don't like to play this at the top level is if White is wants to be boring, he's higher rated, or he's a lot lower rated than you, and he just wants a draw. He can try to repeat, and you have to play an inferior move if you want to get out of the reputation. So that's one reason that puts people off of the queen d6 line. But some people are happy with the draw as black. All right, but we'll see White try to play for a win here. And now we're following a game between impossible to pronounce names. This is Pyotr Dobrowolski versus Jacek Tomczak. I had no chance, but you can see it down below. All right, so we got some normal moves, and instead of this variation, black decided to play knight to e5, and black's approach is a little bit different here. He's going to rely on trading lots of pieces and liquidation to try to go into a favorable endgame. So we see this much different approach. And initially, White gets a lot of pressure. So black can take on f3, and you can actually start by taking with either piece. It leads to the same thing. And now we got to deal with the fact that our queen is attacked. And the most common way is to play e5. We got to get our bishop out. Of course, White should be pretty happy after this exchange because the queen is on an open e file. So you're going to gain some more time. So after such moves, black is really playing with fire here. He's got some pins. White's going to be able to make a lot of threats initially, but if black is able to just continue to deal with the threats and trade lots of pieces, again, he's going to have good chances in the endgame. So what he'd really like to see is a knight versus the bishop. That's his dream endgame, and that's what we'll see today. Okay, so the point of this move is white is threatening to win a piece, so you got to protect your bishop with the pawn. And okay, now both players, I mean, they didn't play the most accurate moves here. Both of these moves are all fine. And now, yeah, black, makes some queen moves that are not necessarily the best, but we'll see this exchange, and it's a very important exchange that you're making. You're giving up a bishop for a knight, so this better be pretty good for you. Is this knight going to emerge as a better piece than the bishop? Well, after this move, white actually goes into a mistaken endgame here. He shouldn't trade the rooks. He should play any other move that doesn't trade it. You should move your rook somewhere. But he allows this trade, and now white is getting a lot of pressure immediately. The knight is coming into f3, and it's kind of funny here after king h1, you have no useful discoveries, but that's a pretty good knight. And after the queen trade, this is simply a winning endgame for black. The problem is, after knight to e5, you don't really have time to save this pawn, which means you're going to lose a pawn, because if you allow me to go here, attacking your bishop, and wherever your bishop moves, you're losing this pawn. So immediately, you're already losing the pawn, and who would have thought that the isolated d pawn would be trouble? So, okay. So he moves the bishop, and again, we just see some nice technique, and the endgame is, it's not an endgame class, it's an opening class, but again, we see a position where black has a better minor piece and a more active king, and he proceeds to win another pawn. This was a pretty nice maneuver, and now he's threatening to both trade the bishops, and then he'll have more pawns in the endgame, so that would be a simple win. So you can't, move the pawn, that would just be losing. So he has to move his bishop, losing another pawn, and yeah, he didn't try very much longer. So again, yeah, we saw a much different approach for black in that game. He went for liquidation, and it really worked. So again, so this is an example of a solid way to play. You get rid of a lot of the pieces and you play the end game. So I would like to know what you guys think out there. The Scandinavian, is it solid? Is it sharp? Is it suspicious? What do you guys think? Just keep sending in your openings that you want to see. Maybe I'll pick your favorite one next time. Hit like, subscribe, tweet, Tumblr, all those other things. Whatever dig is, do that. Hit all the buttons, and I'll see you guys next week.